Hello everyone, my name is Jon Biggerstaff. I'm the volunteer coordinator for Colorado Sierra Club. Today we're going to talk about how to advocate with your legislator or any other person of power that you want to influence, whether it's a legislator or a city council person or anyone you want to bring over to your side of an issue. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at the email address you see here, jon.biggerstaff@sierraclub.org. I'll stay on the slide for a minute, so if you want to write that email down. Originally, this recording was done live with participants, so you might see some slides where we're talking about breaking up into groups and having worksheets. Won't be doing that today because I'm just here recording this training, but if you do want to go through those worksheets or go through any of those exercises, feel free to send me an email and I can send those worksheets right off to you. Or, like I said, if you have any questions at all. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So what's our goal for today? Our goal today is to help you find your legislators and learn how to effectively lobby for issues that are important to you. And today we're focused on statewide legislators, specifically for Colorado State Legislature, so Colorado House, Colorado Senate. But again, we're talking about influencing people in power. So these lessons can apply towards really anyone you want to influence. Now, since we're talking about our state legislators, if you don't know, if you're in Colorado, if you don't know who yours are, just go ahead and go on the internet and Google who are my legislators. And if you're in Colorado, the first link that pops up should be a website from the Colorado state government that allows you to put your address in and find out who your legislators are. It will tell you what Senate district you're in and which House district you're in and the name of your respective legislators. That's how you find them. And legislators are easier to reach than you might think. So a lot of people I talk to are a little concerned that these folks are elected to office, they represent hundreds of thousands of people. Congress represent millions of people. They really have time to talk to you, and the answer is definitely yes. There is certainly a large demand put on their time by everybody, all their constituents, lobbyists, all that good stuff. At the same time, they were elected to represent you, and their job is to serve you and to listen to you, and most, if not all of them, take that very seriously. So I want you to know that they're much more accessible than you might imagine. If we're talking U.S. Congress, you're trying to get a meeting with your U.S. Senator, that might take some time. But if we're looking at local government, city council, and your state legislators, those folks are really accessible. And once you build a relationship with them, you should be able to have a meeting with them, no problem. And they may even take a meeting with you even before they know who you are, as long as you're one of their constituents. So they're definitely easier to reach than you might think. So what's on today's agenda? So first, we're going to talk about how to find your legislators in case you don't know them yet. Actually, we already did talk about it because I skipped ahead a little bit. And we're not going to take a short break because we're not doing this live. But then we're going to talk about how you can be an effective advocate when you actually meet with someone who's in a position of power like a legislator. And finally, we're going to have a Q&A, except for not this time because we don't have a live audience. But again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. If you have a lot of questions, we can set up a time to talk over the phone. Wrong button there. Become a legislative advocate. Legislators care about what is important to their local constituents. That's something that we just talked about. That is their job. That's what they were elected to do, is listen to folks like you. So don't feel like you're ever being a burden when you're trying to set up a meeting with your legislator. Also keep in mind that if we're talking local government, these people are usually in office from terms that are 2 to 4 years, maybe 6, depending on where you live. Congressional appointments can be sometimes have no term limits. But generally speaking, these people have an election to look forward to. So if for no other reason, it obviously behooves them to take meetings from people like you because they're going to be asking for your vote again, maybe as soon as 2 years or 4 years, depending on when they were elected. And you can make a difference. Your relationship with your legislator is critical. And you see we underline the word relationship there. And that's something we're going to talk about a lot today, because we believe that building that relationship is key to you being a successful advocate or a successful lobbyist. Having that relationship with your legislators, as many as you can, will allow you to really talk to them, hear what they have to say, and really voice your opinion effectively and hopefully influence them, even on issues that they might not agree with you on at first. So it really is about building a relationship. I keep pushing the wrong button. Okay, so now we're going to go through a training called Advocating with Your Legislator. This is written by S.J. Light. And S.J. is a volunteer leader for Colorado Sierra Club, and she leads a group of volunteers that we call LACE. And that's an acronym that stands for Legislative Advocates for Colorado's Environment. If you're interested in joining that volunteer team, just send me an email and I can get you plugged in. We'll talk about it a little more later. But SJ is an expert on this kind of thing, an expert on citizen lobbying, and she wrote this training we're going to go through right now. Okay. So what can you expect when you meet with the legislator? And again, this could be a city councilor, it could be really anybody in a position of power, and really it could just be anyone you want to influence, whether they're in a position of power or not. When I look at a lot of the points that SJ makes in this training, I think of a lot of different articles and books I've read on how to influence people and get people to do what you want them to do. I know that sounds a little crass that way when I put it that way, but in reality, that's what we're trying to make happen. Whether it's advocating for an issue that we care about, like climate change, or some other issue that might be important to you on a local level, like cleaning up a river that might be nearby. The end goal, what you're trying to do is you're trying to convince somebody to do something that you want them to do, right? That's really kind of the gist of what we're going for here. So what can you expect when you actually have that meeting? Well, there's a couple different things. So let's assume hypothetically that you're meeting with your legislator to talk about an upcoming bill that is going to help increase the quality of our air, reduce air pollution in Colorado. That's a little hypothetical, a bill to increase the quality of Colorado's air. We'll call it an air quality bill. So what can you expect? Well, one outcome is when you actually have the meeting with the legislators, they may not have any idea what bill you're talking about or what kind of, or they may have no knowledge of the issue that you're bringing to their attention. And that is something that really is to be expected. One thing to keep in mind is that folks who are elected often are subject to just a barrage of bills for every session. So we're talking Colorado legislature, I want to say they're in session for a couple months, I think it's 4 or 5 months, something like that. And there's literally hundreds of bills that are passed or voted on in that time. And they're just one person, often with a very limited staff, maybe with 1 or 2 staff people mostly, or maybe even an intern. So these people have a lot on their plate, and there's a lot of bills going by, and they may not know what you're talking about. They may not know what bill you're referencing, and they may not be familiar with your issue. But don't let that discourage you. That really is to be expected depending on what issue it is. Now, if it's a really common or controversial issue, you'll find they're probably pretty well versed in it. But just keep in mind that whatever is most important to you may not be at the top of their head just because there's so much going on. Some knowledge of the bill. So that's something we have in here, and this is what I think is one of the more common situations is, if you have a specific bill, like an air quality bill we're talking about, they may not know specifically what bill you're talking about. Maybe it hasn't crossed their desk yet, but they have some knowledge of the issue, right? Oftentimes, these bills don't pop out of nowhere. Usually they're years in the making, could be even decades in the making. And legislators are often aware that even though they might not be aware of the specific bill you're talking about, if you're advocating for a specific bill, they usually have some idea of what issue you're talking about. So that's pretty common as well. Supporter of the bill. So that's another outcome. So you might call a meeting with your local legislator and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this air quality bill. I really want you to support it. They might say, you know what, I already support that. And that's really good. And that does not mean you wasted your time. A lot of folks say, I came all the way down here and they were already going to vote yes anyways on this bill that I really want to see passed. But there's definitely some things you can do once they tell you they support the bill. The first thing you can do is ask why. And the reason for that is, well, there's a couple reasons. And one is a little psychological. As they begin to kind of really articulate why they support an issue, what we find is that it tends to really reinforce why they believe it. When you say something out loud, the more you tell somebody else you believe something, the more you believe it, the better you believe it, the more familiar you are with your reasons for believing it. So just having them repeat talking points is just a good idea in general, even if they're all talking points you're familiar with. But the second reason is they may have reasons for supporting it that you can't think of, that you haven't thought of yet, that you can add to your list of reasons of why you support it. It might help you win somebody else over, right? So listening to them explain why they support the bill is definitely not a waste of time. It will help them really reinforce why they believe it, and you might learn something as well. The immovable object, I love this. I love the wording. I don't love when it happens, but what this is referring to is you meet with somebody, a legislator or someone in power, and they just do not agree with you on a specific issue. It could be an ideological thing, or who knows why. We'll talk a little bit more about what to do when the situation comes up later, but definitely should be something that you are anticipating as a possibility. Depending on where you live, we live in I'm recording this in March 2021, a very polarized political climate. This is environmental. It tends to be a very democratic issue. If you're in a very conservative area, you might need a lot of immovable objects. Not to say you will, but I think it's likely that you might need a lot of immovable objects on environmental issues if you're in a conservative area, and vice versa. There's lots of immovable objects on various sides of different issues. But something that you should keep in mind, and we'll give you some tips later on how to deal with that if and when it happens. But those are the 4 outcomes you can expect when you're meeting with a legislator on an issue or a bill. Ways of influencing others. One thing I want to mention really quickly is, I talked about the LACE program earlier, and often when we're training people to lobby their legislators, we're asking them to support certain environmental bills, and to call it at the state capitol here in Colorado. So we have a bill number, we have fact sheets, and that's typically what happens when we're asking someone to lobby their legislator. But that may not be the case with you. Like I said, these lessons can apply towards a variety of different scenarios when you're trying to influence somebody in power. So I might reference bills, might reference issues, but I'm using them interchangeably here. Okay, so what are the ways of influencing others? Let me grab my notes here. Where did I? Okay, here we go. Protest, or poke in the eye. Now, protesting is a wonderful way of influencing people. At the same time, we kind of view it as a last resort, right? You poke someone in the eye as a last resort. Protesting is a way of really turning the pressure up on someone who is not listening to you, like the immovable object we just spoke about. They might tell you they're immovable, but when they have 20 people sitting out there outside their office protesting for days on end, maybe they start changing their mind because maybe they realize, hey, I'm on the wrong side of this issue. A lot of these constituents disagree with me, and they might vote me out next time around. So protesting can be very effective. Here at Sierra Club, we lead a lot of protests. We go to a lot of protests. We organize and support lots of protests on all sorts of different issues. But protesting can be very effective. But it's not really what we're talking about today, because today we're really talking about building a relationship to influence your legislator, to bring them to your way of thinking, to have them vote the way you want them to vote. So ideally, it never gets to the protesting side. If you start off poking someone in the eye, then you're really limiting your options, because then maybe they listen to you, maybe they don't, but you're really decreasing, in my opinion, the chance that you have of them listening to you, because really the relationship is what's going to make that much more likely. So protesting is important. There's definitely a place for it, but it's more of a last resort and not really what we're talking about today. Telling them what to think and or do. Now, this is another thing that is not black and white. We definitely want you to tell them what you think, and we want you to ask them for something specific. So ask them something to do as well. Those 2 things are important. We'll get to that in another slide. But what I want to point out here is that it's not all that we're doing. This is a pretty common issue. You set up a meeting with your legislator, you get 30 minutes, and you say, here's what I think you should do, and here's some data. That's wonderful. We'll talk about data in just a second. That's definitely a good part of what lobbying is, but it's not the only part. As wonderful as that is, it can't be the only thing that we do. We need to have a relationship before we start telling them what to think or do. All right, and here it comes. Build a relationship so you can discuss perspectives. Now, building a relationship requires strong listening skills, right? Any kind of relationship. You don't need to overthink this relationship thing, right? It's just we're using that word, but really what you're trying to do is build a relationship with this person in much the same way you build a relationship with anybody. You're listening to them. It does take some time, so it takes more time. It opens the door for other discussions, and it can last a long time. So I think these are really great points worth expanding on a little more. Yes, building a relationship takes more time, but you find when you have a relationship, when you have a rapport with somebody, they're much more likely to listen to what you think, what your opinion is, especially on issues that they might disagree with you on. Yes, it does take more time, but it is most effective. It also opens the door for many other discussions. So let's say you meet the legislator on a certain bill. Remember, we had the hypothetical air quality bill we were lobbying for. Maybe they are the immovable object on that bill, and they will not listen to you. But that doesn't mean there aren't other issues that they can't work with you on. And may be more likely to work with you on other issues because they couldn't work with you on that issue, right? So you still have some options. It'd be great if they listen to you all the time and agree with you all the time, but that's not generally how the way things work, right? If only. But having that relationship, it keeps that door open so that even if you disagree on one thing, you might be able to influence them on other issues that are important to you. Most volunteers I speak with have a lot of different things they're concerned about. So having a relationship means you can talk about those other issues as well. And this last point is that it can last a long time. You know, if you're meeting with someone who's in Congress, some of those folks are in office for decades, right? Some of those folks have been in office for longer than I've been alive, it seems like. And that may actually be true off the top of my head. And so taking some extra time to build a relationship makes a lot of sense because they could be in office for decades. If we're talking about, you know, Colorado Legislature, sure, some of those terms are 2 years, some of them are 4-year terms. But if you have someone in the House for 8 years, have someone in the Senate for 8 years, 16 years, they're going to be just in the Colorado Legislature. And it doesn't count time they might spend in city council, school board. A lot of these folks make a career in public service and they're elected and running for office for their entire professional lives, essentially. So it's definitely worth taking some extra time because these people often are in office for a very long time. Not always, of course, but they certainly can be. And I would say that's more common than it is not. So that's why we're talking about building a relationship. And once you have a relationship, it's much easier to tell them what to think or do. And if they become the immovable object and you do have to end up protesting, if someone's out to your office protesting, it's much more impactful if you see that it's someone who you have a relationship, right? If you have a relationship with that person, you're more likely to say, hey, what's wrong? What did I do? What can we change here? What can we work on? If it's someone you have no relationship with and they're protesting outside your office, you might just ignore them entirely, right? You might just write them off. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the 3 H's. And before I get into the 3 H's, one thing we're going to talk about just a little bit later, but I think it's worth mentioning here, is that when you set up a meeting with your legislator or whoever you end up meeting with, you're going to want to plan that meeting out. And so part of that planning is the 3 H's that we've broken down just to make it a little bit easier to remember. So it's probably the 3 most critical things to have written down and practice before you have that meeting. The first is appeal to their heart. So whatever issue is important to you, whatever issue you're meeting with them about, tell them personally why you care about that issue and give examples from your personal life on how these issues are affecting you and your family directly. Those personal stories are really powerful. They connect you with your legislator, so you start building that relationship, and it really allows that kind of sense of empathy to develop between both of you. So always appeal to their heart. Next, you appeal to their head. This goes back to telling them what to think or do. Remember, I said we do that. It's just not the only thing that we do. So we do appeal to their head. So after we have that emotional appeal, we back it up with facts and data. So we have, if you're working with the Sierra Club as part of one of our bills, I promise you, we'll have fact sheets and more data than you could take a stick at that you can bring to that meeting with you. But if it's some other issue, always remember to have your data ready. A lot of legislators these days are data driven. In my opinion, not enough of them are, but many of them are very data driven. So have that data ready, have those statistics ready for why you believe what you believe. Always make sure whatever you're bringing them is from a reputable source so they can trust what you're bringing, but it's definitely impactful to have the facts and data with you. Last is appeal to their hand. And this is the most important part. This is what we call the ask, right? So it's when you get to the end, so you appeal to their heart, you say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I believe, here's why I believe it, here are all the facts. What are you asking them to do? You should always have a specific ask in mind. For example, if we have our hypothetical air quality bill, I need you to vote yes on this bill next week when it comes up for a vote, right? Specific action we need them to take. Or maybe it's in committee, it's a horrible bill, you want them to vote against, I want you to oppose this bill in committee. So that could be anything. It's highly dependent on your situation, but always have a specific ask. If it's an issue that's important to you, but you don't know what the ask is, then that's something that I think you should research before you actually go to the meeting. Always have something for them to do. Have them sign a petition or take a picture saying they support something or something like that, right? Have a specific ask for them. So it's the heart, the head, and the hand, the 3 H's you should use when planning your meeting. Begin to build a relationship. So as I mentioned before, prepare for the meeting. So how do you prepare for a meeting with your legislator? Well, the first thing you have to do is figure out who they are. So we talked about this before. If you're in Colorado and you don't know who your state legislators are, just Google who is my legislator. And if you're in Colorado, the first link will pop up, will be a Colorado government website. You can put your address in and they'll tell you what district that you're in. Then that should apply to pretty much wherever you live. If you just Google who my legislator is, it's a bunch of websites and free services online that will tell you what district that you're in. I would look at city council, school board, state legislatures, congressional, everything, dog catcher, anything you could find. It's in your best interest to know who all of your representatives are on various levels of government. So that's the first step. And again, if you have any issues with that, you can feel free to shoot me an email and I'll help you out. But it should be pretty easy to figure out who these folks are. So once you know who they are, the next thing is to start getting an idea of what they're up to. So if most elected officials are really good about having email lists, Facebook page, or other social media, Twitter, you name it, and you can connect with them there and they will tell you kind of what they're up to, what issues they're working on. If they're having town halls, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, so there's not a lot of town halls going on. But after we pass through this pandemic, they usually have regular town halls. We can meet them, ask questions as one of their constituents. They usually have bills they're working on, all kinds of information. But just make those connections, get on those email lists, follow them on Facebook, whatever you need to do to figure out what they're doing. Because you can get a really good feel for how that meeting might go. You can get a really good feel for if they're going to be the immovable object, right? So you can prepare accordingly. So definitely connect with them online. Now we have a couple worksheets. One's called Connecting with Your Legislator and the Legislator Meeting Worksheet. All those do is they help you plan the same things we're talking about today. So they have blanks for the 3 H's, all that good stuff. You write down what districts that you're in. If you want those worksheets, send me an email and I'll send them over to you. But really all those worksheets ask for is all the things we're talking about today. There's nothing on there that we're not talking about today. But I'm happy to send it to you if you like. Review bill fact sheet. So if you're going and lobbying for a certain bill, often groups like Sierra Club will have what we call fact sheets. So it's usually like a 1-pager with 7 or 8 bullet points on why this bill is important, why they should vote yes, or why they should vote no. So I think the main thing to get to kind of take from this point here is to always be prepared. Connect with them first, figure out who they are, and then do your homework before you actually have the meeting. The last thing you want to do is get to the meeting and feel like you're unprepared. Thank the legislator for a meeting. So I think that one's important. These folks, yes, they are elected to represent you, and it's their job to listen to you, absolutely. At the same time, there's a lot of yous out there, right? If we're talking Colorado legislature, those districts are anywhere from 50 to 100,000 people, maybe even more than that. Off the top of my head, I'm not totally sure. But that's a lot of constituents, right? It's a lot of demands on their time, plus all the lobbyists that want to meet with them, all the various groups that are out there that want to meet with them, all the other legislators that want to meet with them for strategy reasons. So these folks have a lot of demands on their time, and just thanking them for meeting with them, I think is something good to end with, or I would say start and end with, because again, the point is to build a relationship, right? And we want to thank them for spending some time with us. A 2-minute summary of you. So don't forget, I would say right before you go into the heart part of the 3 H's, right before you start connecting the issues to what's important to you, tell them a little about yourself. Of course, you want to lead with your name, but not only just your name, where you live, how long you've lived in a district. I think we actually have some ideas here. Yeah, where you live, for how long, size and nature of your family, and the things that you care about. And so that's going to, of course, be highly dependent on your situation. But a good example would be, hi, Mr. or Mrs. Legislator, my name is John. I live in Senate District 33. I lived here for 12 years. My family was from here, going back 3 generations, whatever you had to say, but something along those lines, a little story about you. You definitely want to keep it short, 1 to 2 minutes. Chances are your meeting window is not going to be very big. Like we talked about, these folks have a lot of demands on their time. But just give it 1 or 2 minutes about who you are. Definitely don't spend 10 minutes on your life story. You might see them glaze over if you do that. But you want to start building a relationship, and a part of that is telling them a little bit about yourself, right? That makes sense. State topic bill. So that depends on kind of what you're doing. You might not be lobbying someone for a bill, but if you are, you want to have the bill number ready. So we talked about the air quality bill, but I know that's kind of a rough name I gave our hypothetical situation here. But ideally, you want a bill number because there could be 6 air quality bills. One could be controversial, the rest could be pretty mundane. So you want to have the bill number ready. In Colorado, it usually starts with year, like bill number 21-107, something like that, or House Bill HB. I think it'd be HB 21-3 digits, something like that. But it's probably different for every state, and it's definitely different for every legislative body. But definitely have if you are there for a specific bill, make sure you have that specific bill number ready. And then, get away from me there. Can I count on you for support for this bill? So that goes back to the hand. What specific ask are we going to ask of them? Are we asking them to say vote yes on something, vote no on something, say public support for something? Or there could be just a number of different situations of things that we could be asking from them. But the point is that you have something specific to ask from them. Okay, now we've made it to the immovable object. So we talked about this before. This is a person that just does not agree with you on this issue for whatever reason. This is going to happen, something that you should be prepared for. And if you've done your homework, you know who these people are, what district that you're in, and you're on their email list and things like that, you should be able to get a pretty good idea of where they're going to fall. Not to overly generalize people, but if we're talking about a strong environmental bill and you live in a very conservative area, you should anticipate that this might happen. Doesn't necessarily mean it will. There are people who work across party lines all the time, so definitely keep that in mind. But you should have an idea whether they're going to be an immovable object if you've done your homework beforehand. But if they are, it does not mean there's nothing you can do. For example, you can ask, is there anything I can get for you that would help change your mind? You never know. There could be some piece of data that has them believing a certain thing about the bill. They don't want to support the air quality bill because it does this. And you might know, actually, hey, that part was taken out of the bill 2 days ago. Something like that, right? There could be some piece of information you have that they don't. It's definitely possible. We talked about there being hundreds of bills for a typical legislative session. So it's not uncommon for them to have some things mixed up, some things confused, right? So, but you have your facts ready, you've done your research, you might be able to tell them some information they don't know. I'm not going to lie to you, that doesn't always happen, but it could. It's definitely worth checking. Next point you can make is, hey, I'm just one of your constituents, but I'm sure there are more of us who want you to support this bill. So there we're kind of getting into the, okay, so we're not going to change their mind, but it's important that they know that it's not just you who feel this way. They're representing a whole district of people, and what you're telling them is, hey, I'm here telling you this right now, but I've talked to all my friends, all my neighbors, they all vote and they all feel the same way. That might start triggering something in their brain that, hey, maybe I'm disconnected with my constituents on this issue. And then you could say, I'm going to encourage them to respectfully meet with you, comment on your Facebook, attend your town halls, and other means to let you know what your constituents feel is important. And so this is a little bit of a trickier area, but what we're telling them here are a couple of different things. Well, the main point we're trying to make is that we're not going away. The couple things we're telling them is this issue is important to us. I'm your constituent. It's not just me who feel this way, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to go to your town halls, I'm going to your Facebook, and I'm be kind of a pain in your side on this particular issue. And that is totally fine. And the legislator should absolutely respect that. This is what you believe, and it's absolutely your job to advocate for things you believe with your local legislators, right? At the same time, what we're not doing is making an immediate enemy out of them. I think that tends to happen a lot. They seem like they're an immovable object, and so you immediately revert to, well, they're never going to be on my side. I'm going to harass you every town hall that you host. That does tend to happen, especially in today's very hyper-polarized political climate. But we have to realize that when you make an enemy out of them, that is where your influence ends. So whether it's not only on this issue, but any other issue moving forward. So that's the worst thing that could happen, because then you lose any power you may have had. When in reality, maybe they could change their mind later on. Maybe there could be another issue you could move them on. There's a lot more ways to go about it than making an enemy out of them. Even though it does happen on occasion, it is politics. We all know that, but it's kind of the worst case scenario. At the same time, just because we don't want to make an enemy out of them doesn't mean we're going to push our ideas any less, right? We're there to actually see the change, actually make the change that we want to see. And then, of course, thank them for their time, and I hope we can find bills to agree upon going forward. Keep in mind, these people could be in office for a very long time. So even if they end up being immovable on the certain bill and they never come to your side, there could be other bills, other issues that go on years down the road that you need their help on. Okay, that is pretty much it for our training today. I know that was fast and furious. When we did this live, I think it probably took 3 or 4 times this long. So sorry if it went by quick for you, but feel free to rewind. Feel free to email me any questions that you have. We talked about the Colorado LACE team. This is our Legislative Advocates for Colorado's Environment. That's what that stands for. If you want to join that team, just shoot me an email. I can get you all signed up. If you have any questions, I can answer those questions for you. And remember, practice makes perfect. I know it can seem intimidating meeting with a legislator, meeting with a politician who's elected to office, but I promise you, as someone who knows a lot of them, they're just regular people like you and me. The vast majority of them are trying to do their job well, and they do want to hear from you. But practice helps with that, right? I would say do the worksheets, send me an email saying the worksheets if you like, practice your 3 H's, do your due diligence, get connected with them, and then you'll be really well prepared for that meeting. What you can also do is practice on, if you have a spouse that you can bug, or someone that you live with, or a roommate or a friend, they can pretend to be a legislator, and you can pretend that once you have your meeting planned out, pretend to have the meeting with them. Go talk through it with them, have them talk through it with you, and see how it goes. Like we said, practice makes perfect. Thanks again for attending the training. Again, send me an email if you have any questions, and we hope to see you in the Capitol soon, lobbying a legislator.